So I was okay because I work for Ronald Blue Trust, and I get called Ron all the time. That's been going on for like many, many years. But it's a privilege to be able to share with you all a little bit about this whole issue of legacy. And Dr. Hornsby really set me up because we use the word legacy. You see it up on the board there, and it's on your deal here in great big letters. But do we really know what it means? I'm going to give you the simple definition. It's how we're remembered when we pass from this earth. And you heard Dr. Hornsby say that Reggie Campbell, who, by the way, was a neighbor of Julie's and mine up in Roswell for years. I've known Reggie for a long time. You heard how he was remembered. That was his legacy. Your legacy is how you are remembered when you pass from this earth. But guess what? You're building your legacy while you're alive. And that's what's another word I want to give you tonight called heritage. How you're building into and imparting to people behind you is what we call a heritage. So what's your heritage vision? What are you trying to pass on? What are you trying to build into those that come after you? Because guess what? The minute you die, your legacy's set. So your heritage vision, what you're doing today will become your legacy when, like Reggie, you pass away. And see, we all have a heritage, right? You all have a heritage from your family. I had a heritage from my dad, and heritage can be good or bad. You know, the heritage I learned from my dad that was good was how to have a work ethic. That was a really good thing. But heritage can also be bad. What you're building in and imparting to your children and grandchildren could be bad. He taught me how not to treat your wife. He was not good with my mom. He also taught me how to not be generous. In other words, to be stingy. I never understood giving at all. I never saw it modeled. I never saw it imparted to me or built into me. And so my heritage was one of not being generous at all. And then I met Julie. And we got married, and she didn't bring any debt into the marriage, but she did bring a bunch of missionaries she supported around the world into the marriage. And I thought, what the heck, why don't these people go get jobs? And so I was like, you know. But my heritage was not that. She had a heritage of being generous. And so my point I want to say to you is your legacy, how you're going to be remembered, is being determined right now by every decision you make and the things you're doing and what you're building and imparting and passing on to the generations that come after you. So let's unpack a little bit. Like I said, I was not taught to be generous, but after being in the business for over 40 years, I've learned to be generous. So what I'm going to do in my short time is give you 2 4-letter words. I want to give you 2 principles and tell you a story. So 1 Timothy 6 says, instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or fix their hope in the uncertainty of riches, but in God who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous, ready to share, storing up for themselves a solid foundation for the future, so they may take hold of that which is life indeed. So men and women, that verse basically tells us that if you're rich in this world, and guess what? If you have more than you need, you're rich, so it applies to all of you. Most people read that verse and say, it doesn't apply to me. It does apply to you. It does apply to me. We're told to be generous. So the 4-letter word that goes with a generous person, I believe, is the word wise. You are wise if you're generous. Now let's contrast that with the farmer over in Luke 12. What did that farmer do? His crops did really well. Remember the story? And his crops did great, and so he thought, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build bigger barns. I'm going to tear down my old barns and build bigger barns. And he was not rich towards God, and what was he called? A fool. So men and women, that's the choice we all have. Are we going to be wise and build a legacy of generosity, or are we going to be a fool and not be rich towards God? So those are the 2 4-letter, you didn't come here tonight thinking you can get 2 4-letter words. You just got 2 4-letter words. Hopefully you remember those. Now let me tell you a couple principles that have also been impactful for me as I've learned and tried to build this heritage of generosity into my boys so that that can be my legacy when I pass on. So the first principle is the principle of reverse compounding. How many of you have heard of compounding? Yeah. We understand compounding, our retirement plans, our investments. We put money aside, and the longer it can grow, the more it grows to, and we think that's great, compounding. But guess what reverse compounding is? When it comes to your giving, we all have an expiration date. We all have a date we go to be with Jesus. And every day you and I wait to give is one less day we have for it to compound for our benefit in heaven. Think about that. Every day you wait to get involved in what God's doing around the world and get involved in being generous is one less day you have to compound for your benefit in heaven. It says in Matthew 6, do not store up treasures in heaven where moth and rust don't destroy and thieves don't break in and steal. And I'm not sure how much credit you give it when you die, because you can't take it with you anyway. Now you should have estate planning, you should have charity in your estate plan documents, I understand that. But just think about that. That's the principle of reverse compounding. Every day you wait is one less day. So why not start today? Why not start tomorrow? Don't wait. Don't put it off. Well, I'll do it at the end of the year. The sooner you start, the better. That's the principle of reverse compounding. Let me give you another principle that's really helped me in this giving journey is the principle of limited sphere. How many of you vacation in Kansas? No, not even one hand. Usually I get at least one hand. Somebody's driven through there going to Colorado. See, Kansas gets a bad rap because everybody's on the way to Colorado. Colorado has mountains. So, and guess what? Eastern Colorado is way uglier than Western Kansas, but people are cussing Kansas all the way across 8 hours. Anyway, Julie and I would take the boys, and we had a tradition when the boys were young. We'd go back to see the grandparents in Kansas. We'd get in the car, and we'd head back to the farm, and we'd get off the interstates because we wanted to see Americana. So we'd get off and drive on the 2-lane roads that paralleled the interstates. You can't do that back here on the East Coast because the roads don't go anywhere. But out west, you can parallel. And so we're on these 2-lane roads, and we're driving along, and look up. You come to these little towns, right? And you look up on the hill, and here's this great big house. White fence all around. You got the picture, Hereford cattle out front. This is a guy that has financial capital. He's the banker, the doctor, the dentist, the business owner, the executive in town. He's got a lot of financial wealth. You see his big house up on the hill. Then you go on through town. The houses are still nice. They get a little smaller. And pretty soon you go across the railroad tracks and you go past a bunch of double-wide trailers and you're out of town. You got the visual? What happens 50 miles down the road? 50 miles down the road, the same thing happens. Another town, big house up on the hill, the person with the nice spread, the person that has financial capital, the person that has money, the rich person, smaller houses, double-wide trailers, you're out of town. And it dawned on me, does the guy in the one town know the guy in the next town? Probably not. So men and women, here's my challenge to you as it is to me. If we make it our goal to amass financial capital, we will always and only impact a limited sphere of people. Who knows where you live and what you drive? 200 people, 300, 400? It's a limited number of people. And guess what? I hate to tell you, nobody cares. Nobody cares what you drive and where you live. But if you invest your money, if you get about using your money to invest in what God's doing around the world, that's why what I love what 4G3 is doing and what Wahid and Lila are doing is you can impact an unlimited sphere of people. And you won't know this side of heaven the number of people you've impacted. So the choice we all have is do we use our money to try to impress a limited number of people? This principle helps me when I drive around North Atlanta, right? There's all these new things called modern farmhouses. You know what I'm talking about. Used to be 5-4 in the door, now it's modern farmhouses. And I could get discontent, think, man, I have a nice big new house. And then I remember nobody cares. No, very few people know. So I get back to thinking about how can I use my financial capital to impact an unlimited sphere of people. You see the book you got, The Eternal Rewards of Investing Yourself and Your Money in Your Family? This book is about how to use your money to have more life, how to invest in leaving a godly legacy and pouring into your children, not just building financial legacy. So it helps me, and I hope it helps you to have this principle of limited sphere in your mind as you're thinking through, what am I doing? God's blessed me. What am I doing with what I have? Am I just trying to impress a limited number of people? Am I going to invest in like 4G3 and my church and other ministries? Am I going to invest in my family? I call these posterity investments. I was going to call the book Posterity versus Prosperity, but everybody thinks posterity is your rear end. So I did not call it that, all right? But posterity is investing in people. Prosperity are the financial instruments. So I would encourage you to think about investing differently. And I need to tell this for Lila. She wants me to tell the cousin camp story. So Julie and I, one of our posterity investments was we decided to do a cousin camp. And what started off as a zip line and just a little platform morphed into a $10,000 treehouse and is like crazy. But that was an investment. So it was an investment in creating some memories with the grandchildren. So my point is, we have a choice. We either use our money to invest in things that are going to matter for eternity, or we invest in stuff and try to impress a limited number of people. That's the principle of limited sphere. Now let me tell you a story that to me brings home what we're talking about here tonight and why this stuff's also important. So many of you ever been up to Barnsley Gardens up the road here? Yeah, you've been up there. Nice place, right? Do you know the story of Godfrey Barnsley? Maybe not. You're looking like you're trying to think about it. Well, I'll tell you. Want me to tell you a story?
Is it the prince? Is there like a prince involved?
No, it wasn't a prince. That was the guy that came and took it over and developed it. But Godfrey Barnsley is one of the richest men in the world in the early 1800s. One of the richest men in the world. So he decides to build this nice place up the road here and up 75 at Barnsley Gardens. So he has hot running water, makes a really nice place up there, as you know. But he died in 1840. It went through 4 generations of his family. By 1940, it was sitting there in disarray, and it was overgrown by kudzu for the next 50 years. And then the prince came along, and in 1990, they made it into a 5-star resort. But guess what his legacy is, what he's remembered for? If you go up there today, all that he invested in is called the Barnsley Ruins. Men and women, it's a pile of rocks. Now keep that visual in your mind just for a minute while I tell you another story. Julie and I got a call, or I got a call at the office one day about 6 years ago, and the gentleman on the other end of the line said, my dad just went to be with Jesus. And we were expecting it, but it was still kind of hard to hear, and I said, well, when's the funeral? So he told me when the funeral was, so Julie and I got in the car a few days later and drove to this small town in South Carolina, 5-hour drive over there. We get to this small church, 3 o'clock funeral, and there's no place to park. We finally find a place to park, and we go into the church, and it's standing room only. I mean, there's no place to sit, and it's standing room only, and the son took us to a place that we could sit. And one of the sons got up and said, if you were impacted by my dad's generosity this way, stand up. A few people stood up. If you were impacted by my dad's generosity this way, stand up. A few more people stood up, and pretty soon, men and women, everybody in the church was standing up. This man had impacted his whole community. When he died, his legacy was one of being generous, but he didn't just get that way. It was 30, 40 years of getting involved in what God was doing. Went to the cemetery, and one of the Generation 3, one of the grandchildren said, thanks for teaching my dad to be generous. So men and women, as you're sitting here tonight and you're thinking about, what's your legacy going to be? Are you going to be like Reggie Campbell? Are they going to be talking about what you did that was so positive, but as Reggie, developing radical mentoring? But you have a choice with how you use your money and the decisions you make and the things you're building and imparting to your children and grandchildren to leave a legacy that's going to be something you want said about you, but it needs to start today. So as Julie and I drove back from that small town, I had those 2 things in my mind. What do I want? Do I want to invest in things that are just going to burn up or be a pile of rocks, or do I want to invest in something that's going to impact people for eternity? And so like I said, when you invest in things like 4G3, you're impacting people, and you won't even know this side of heaven. So my hope for you would be that when you get to heaven, there'd be a long line of people coming up to thank you, and that's when you'll know that you have left a legacy that really matters. So thank you very much.